I'm Linda Hirsch, and this is EdCast, a program created and produced by educators for everyone interested in education. Welcome back to a new season of EdCast. For some of us, September, not January, marks the beginning of the year. The fall opening of school is filled with possibilities for learning and growth, but it can also be filled with anxieties about what lies ahead. Many children dread the return to school and start worrying about it weeks before. As September gets underway, many parents and caregivers are dealing with children who are not having easy adjustments, and there can be many reasons. Today on EdCast, we will look at some of the stressors kids face in school and what we can do to help them cope. Separation anxiety, conflicts with teachers, learning challenges, and more. Everything, almost, you need to know about helping kids go back to school. Coming up now on EdCast. My guest today is Rae Jacobson, the editorial content director at Understood.org. She is an ADHD expert whose work focuses primarily on mental health and neurodiversity. Rae was previously senior editor at the Child Mind Institute. Her work has appeared in numerous publications, including New York Magazine, Parenting, and the Huffington Post. She is the author of A Smart Girl's Guide to ADHD, and she has consulted for American Girl and other publications. Welcome to EdCast, and thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Sure. As I said in the beginning of the show, that this is our return to school show, and one of the first things I want to talk about is children's anxiety about going back to school. Now, I will confess that I had tremendous return to school anxiety, and when we went shopping for school supplies at the end of August, there weren't enough Crayolas in the box with a built-in sharpener to calm me down about going back. So let's talk a little bit about what makes kids nervous about going back to school.
Yeah, well, I will say you and I are kindred spirits. I too everyone was so excited, and I just thought like, oh no.
Me too.
And I think a lot of what makes kids nervous about going back to school, it relates to who that child is. So if they're a student who's struggled in the past and they have bad associations with maybe a teacher or even being in the school building, or they've had trouble with learning in a variety of capacities, that can cause a lot of anxiety. Kids who've struggled socially can feel anxiety. Even just kids who are feeling like this is a new school, this is a new year, these are new kids, these are new teachers. There's so much that can weigh on kids, and it really depends on how a parent handles it, how the kid's going to feel when they get there on that first day.
So let's talk about what can we do, all right? And by the time we view this show, the school may have just started, but the issues are still here. What can we do to help kids adjust to the new school year?
So I think the first thing to do is, as early as possible, like kids will be in school, but like one of the things that parents can do generally is start to sort of build some routine in at home. You know, if you're going to be waking up early to get to school, start waking up, with about a week in advance. If that's not something you've been doing, help kids adjust to the schedule as gently as possible. If they need a slightly earlier bedtime because they're struggling to get up in the morning, go for that. Anything you can do to physically support kids in getting there, which is sleep, enough snacks, making sure that they have enough time in the morning so it's not a rush, it's not a panic. Anxiety isn't raised by the fact that they're trying to find their backpack or they don't know where their lunch is. Anything like that, that's just physical scaffolding that you can build into your day that's going to make it easier for everybody.
Anything else?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, let's talk. What else?
So another big thing is sitting down and actually trying to get your kid, if they're open to it, to engage, asking open-ended, non-judgmental questions to help them kind of work through some of the worries they might be experiencing, to express things that they might think seem silly, really offering validation and a place for those worries to land with you. Instead of saying, so what are some things you're nervous about this year? You could say, are you feeling excited about school? And if they go like, hey, what's up? I noticed that you kind of shrugged at that. Is there anything you want to talk about? And you can always, always say, because kids may have a lot of things that they're thinking but not necessarily know how to talk about them right away. If you don't want to talk right now, that's fine. I'm here whenever you need me. And really be there.
That's very good advice. Now, for parents, I always joke, but there's truth to my joke, that my mother must have suffered terribly with getting me ready for school when I was so anxious about going. Is there anything we can advise for parents to help their own levels of stress in this?
Absolutely. So one of the interesting things, Understood, where I worked, did a Harris poll, which found, I the exact number is escaping me, that parents, especially of students who learn and think differently, have as much anxiety about going back to school as they would going into something like Christmas that they're hosting at their house for 50 people. The anxiety
Really?
can be profound for parents, whether or not you're the parent of a child who's struggled or not. It's a very intense time, and you're adjusting your schedule. Everybody's going through a lot. So the first thing is be kind to yourself. Try to take care of yourself in a material way. For example, taking a walk, finding people to talk to and share any concerns you're having. Make sure you're sharing those concerns out of earshot of your kid, though. It's always important to remember kids are listening even when we're not talking to them, and I think that sometimes can be hard if the kid's like watching TV and you're in the kitchen. But my mom always liked to say, little pitchers have big ears.
Yes, right.
So finding places to put your worries and also just kind of making sure that any anxiety that you're experiencing has a place to go.
And so I remember, so it's important then to plan.
Yes.
Is that your key advice then? Planning?
Planning, I will say this. One of the things I think that is the hardest for kids going back to a new school year and parents is hope. And I always say this thing that I shamelessly stole from an old neighbor of mine. Hope is not a plan. And it's very easy, especially if like things were difficult or you've had some struggles in the past, to think like, this is the year. We're going to do great this year. It's going to be amazing. But unless that hope is scaffolded with actual plan and action, it's very likely that it won't last that long. And that's not because it's not valuable, but because it needs backup to work. So if you know that your child struggles with organization, for example, making a visual schedule so they know when to get things together, making sure that you have cues like alarms or reminders, making sure their backpack's packed the night before and they have a specific place to put it in. Anything you know based on what you've experienced with your child in the past and yourself in the past. Like, for example, when I'm getting my child ready for school, I make her lunch the night before because there is no way, none, that I'm going to have the time to do it in the morning. Making sure that you're taking kind of stock of what you're all like as people and what you're all like when you're all together in a limited time.
Right.
And making sure that you're planning ahead for that. That's the kind of planning I think that can be really valuable at home. Once we get into school, it's a completely different situation, and there's a lot that parents can do there as well.
Now, we're going to talk about that. I do want to say that when I think back upon my own childhood experiences, the actual teacher that I had made a big difference. There were some that I thought were just mean, and some that I thought were especially nice, and that's a kind of segue for me to another topic that I've seen that you have written about. And that is when a child genuinely believes that their teacher dislikes them. All right, so let's talk about that. Is there reality to that? And, if, you know, what can and should we do for children who really genuinely believe the teacher does not like them?
Well, I've experienced that myself. I think a lot of people have. And for kids, it can be really, really upsetting and also really off-putting. Kids can be avoidant if they think the teacher doesn't like them. They might be reluctant to speak up in class, and it's kind of one of those self-compounding things. They're afraid the teacher dislikes them, so they don't put up their hand. They don't want to reach out for help because they don't want to talk to that teacher. So it's sort of like a loop of difficulty that kids can get into. If they believe a teacher dislikes them and they share that with you, the first thing I would do is validate those feelings. You don't want to be like, I mean, I'm sure it's fine. They like you fine, you know? Which is tempting because you, as a parent, you know, I feel this with
Right.
my daughter. I want to make her feel better right away.
Yeah.
But kids actually need an ear, a sympathetic, empathetic ear, who can sit there and say like, oh, wow, that's really hard to feel like that. I'm sorry that you're experiencing that. Let's talk about it. And giving them a chance to talk about what exactly are they seeing and maybe doing a little reality testing with them, like, oh, instead of saying like, well, that doesn't sound like that's a problem. I mean, I'm sure she was just busy. You would say like, oh, wow, I wonder, you know, when I hear you say that she was ignoring you, I can't help but think like, there's so much going on in a classroom. Can you think about some other things that were happening like around that time? Helping kids kind of get a little perspective can be helpful. But another thing, and this is a very challenging thing for a lot of parents, I think, is to avoid using the opportunity as a chance to chastise your child for things that you think they could do better. Right? So like, oh, do you think the teacher is mad because you didn't hand your homework in last week? That's maybe not the most helpful thing you can say in that situation.
Probably the thing a lot of us would say.
It's hard not to because you want your child to do well. And of course, as parents, we feel things when we hear like, oh, this teacher dislikes my child.
Right.
Some of those things might be defensive. Some might be irritated with your kid, irritated with the school. So a lot of it is also checking in with yourself and making sure that you're processing your feelings in a way that is productive. And if you need to go scream into a pillow later, go for it. But for then, when you're with your child, keeping the questions open-ended, non-judgmental, and helping them kind of get a little perspective on the situation. That's part one.
Okay. There's a part two here, because I have to say that often children say, the teacher only yells at me, all of us were bad in the class, 4 people did something bad, but I'm the only one who got yelled at. And I have to think maybe sometimes that's true.
Sometimes
All right, so
it is.
tell us again. So what happens then?
So there are realities to this, right? Like, I think that kids are sometimes reliable reporters, and as parents, our job is to listen to them and try to figure out what's going on, right? So it's possible that a kid who is having behavioral issues is actually getting yelled at more than the other kids, and they're not seeing what they're doing is difficult. Kids in their chair, they're doing this.
Stop moving.
Stop
Right.
moving. Can you sit down, please? Or the kid's fidgeting, or maybe they're doodling, or they're doing things that they're doing to sort of scaffold whatever their neurodiverse needs are. That's going to be something that a teacher might not necessarily pick up on and think the kid is either being disruptive, rude, ignoring them when they're talking. And a lot of that is stuff that goes along with learning differences, or with just being a kid who maybe needs a little bit more flexibility in the classroom than they're receiving, right? That said, teachers are people, and they want their students to do well. They didn't take that job, that super easy job, right, being a teacher.
Pays so well.
Right? So, yeah, not long hours at all.
Yeah.
Those teachers are there because they want to be there, because that's something they care about. And that's something that I think as a parent, when you're feeling worried about your child, when you're feeling defensive, it can feel like maybe they're the enemy. That's almost never true. What you want to do is go in, help them see your child for who they are, understand what's going on for real. Like, for example, maybe your child's struggling with attention, and so they bounce in their seat. Maybe that's okay, but they need to do it in a quieter way, like bringing a squeezy toy or something like that. There are all sorts of ways that we can help teachers understand our children and also respect the fact that they're in a classroom. They have, in some of the public schools here, we know classrooms are as big as 30 kids. That's a lot to take in, a lot to manage. And a teacher who's trying to do the best thing for everybody might not necessarily be as sympathetic as they want to be in all the moments. So helping scaffold what the teacher needs, what your child needs, and also being direct in a way that is productive, like, hey, I really wanted to reach out to you. I'm feeling a little concerned. Can we talk?
Okay, so now you're leading into the next part. Thank you so much. Very helpful here. How you bring this up and how you actually deal with this. So, do you go into the school and talk to the teacher? And this is in general, not just about a child who feels my teacher doesn't like me,
Yeah.
but anytime you feel there's an issue that you want to bring up with the teacher. I think that all of us as parents, and I know that I've had trouble with that, how do you approach the teacher? Is it just the teacher should... I have friends who will say, I'm going right to the vice principal, or I'm not even bothering with the teacher, I'm going right to the principal. What do you see as the most productive avenue for letting the school know that your child is having issues?
I will say the first thing, and I don't think this is something people say, is take a breath. Because when something's going on with your kid, a lot of us, our first instinct is to charge right ahead,
Yes.
And it gets powerful, that feeling. So take a breath, take a step back, think about what you really want to say, because teacher's time is limited and because you want to be able to communicate as clearly as possible, right? So if, for example, you feel like your child is getting yelled at more than another kid, or seems to be falling behind, those are things that might make you tempted to say, like, I'm going to the vice principal, this is not working out. But taking a step back, taking a breath, you're going to say, like, actually, I should really reach out to my child's teacher. When you do that, having a paper trail is important, especially if you're going to need those things for documentation for an IEP or an evaluation later. So emails instead of phone calls. You can back them up with phone calls, but anything where you're writing down and keeping track of the visits and the interactions you're having with the school, that can benefit you later in the process, just because you'll be able to say, like, hey, here's some of the things we've been working on with the teacher. That said, another important thing to remember is, especially because this is a back to school show this time, is that the very beginning of school is a very hard time for teachers. They're incredibly busy. There's a lot going on. So with that in mind, if you notice that your child is beginning to struggle right from the get, the best thing that you can do is keep track of the things that you're going to want to talk about. Where are the trouble spots? What's coming up for them? Is it homework? Is it attention? Is it math? Is it reading? And remember that kids can have all kinds of different approaches. And just keeping an eye on what's going on and taking notes for yourself at home. At Understood, we have a really awesome thing called Take Note, which is a good tool that parents can download. It's free, it's available, to use to sort of just check in with what's going on with their child. Just observe and make a special kind of log of what's happening, so that when you do go talk to the school, you have something to bring in, something concrete, and they're able to follow your thinking. So anything where you're talking to the teacher, coming in prepared is really helpful because, again, we go back to time is limited for you and for the teacher, and you want to get the most out of it.
Now, how do you speak to the teacher? I have a feeling that some of us, I always say us, 'cause I totally identify, have buried our own causes as soon as we opened our mouths, and that we handled things in a way that could have been viewed as offensive or non-sympathetic. I just think that any parent who wants to advocate for the child needs some help in learning how to handle that dynamic. So what suggestions do you have?
I think you talk to the teacher the way that you would want to talk to anybody. Respectfully, engagingly. You come in and you say, we're a team. If you come from that place, you're going to have a lot better luck. If, as sometimes happens, it ends up that the teacher is genuinely somebody that you don't feel comfortable working with, make a note of that and find other avenues. Schools are big. There are a lot of different places you can take your concerns, but starting with the teacher is important because that's the person who has the most face time with your child. Start there, make notes about your meeting, try to come from a place of collaborative respect, and you're going to get a better result. That said, it's a different conversation for different parents, right?
Right.
If you're not a native English speaker, that might be more challenging. If
Exactly.
you're somebody who's a person of color and the teacher is white, that might be more challenging. There's a lot of dynamics at play, and checking in with yourself and even maybe bringing someone who can help you into the room if you're not feeling comfortable, whether that's a family friend, a community member, another person who is equipped to talk to the teacher in ways that you don't feel comfortable doing, that's always okay. You just need to let them know that you're there to work with them because what you both want, and this is a leap of faith, I know for a lot of parents, is the best thing for your kid.
And that is just such wonderful advice. So I want to move on from there to another big issue I think that we all deal with, and that is the impact of social media on our children's lives. And let me take a look at that, if you can, not only just young children, but middle schoolers and high school. What's your take on how much control parents should or can have over social media, and are there any guidelines or things that you think are okay and some things that are just not okay?
I mean, I will say, I think like many people of my age, I find social media to be a necessary evil in a lot of ways, you know, to connect with people and stuff. When it comes to kids, social media is more confusing. For adults, we're somewhat self-limiting. We have the ability to make choices. We're
Right.
better at reality testing. If we see something, hopefully, we question it a little bit. Kids may not have that availability. Depending on the age of the child, what you're going to need to do is going to be different. Different families have different thresholds too. Maybe in one family, everybody has their own phone. Maybe in another family, social media is verboten. It really depends on where you're coming from. But generally, I think there are some basic truisms that are just kind of like healthy in general, which is limited time, making sure that you have some sense of what your kid is looking at. And that does not mean spying or prying or, you know, logging things up, but really sitting down and talking about it in the same way that you would if a little kid was watching TV. You'd want to know what they were seeing. Any kid of any age is absorbing a lot via social media. You want to know what's going into their brain. Is it something that maybe you could do a little bit of checking in on, you know, if it's something that seems to be affecting them negatively? That said, a lot of kids, especially post-pandemic, have used social media as a tool to connect with one another. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. Like, I think it's easy to say social media is always bad. I don't think that's necessarily true. It's just about parents kind of making sure that you're in there, you're checking in with them, and you're limiting the amount of time they spend in that universe because it's a big world and you don't want that to be all they see.
I mean, you probably remember that not that long ago during the pandemic, the U.S. Surgeon General put out a statement
Oh, yes.
that being on social media was actually detrimental to the mental health and well-being of children and adolescents. And I suppose what we can't control is like social media on the phone, you know, when our children are out of the house and they're on the phone. So is there any way, signs that we should be aware of that let us know
Yes.
that our children are getting into trouble?
I think this is probably more relevant for kids who are in middle and high school, or even like slightly younger kids, but kids who are a little bit more social media exposed. It's true, it can be incredibly detrimental to mental health. That said, the things that you should be looking out for, whether they're social media caused or not, are not different depending on that. If your kid is withdrawn, if they are very anxious, if they are not eating, if they are, you know, no longer enjoying things they used to enjoy, if they seem significantly different to you in a short period of time, anything that a parent would kind of use as a, like, uh-oh, that's a sign that I should be checking in more, that is definitely something you want to be paying more attention to. Kids, especially now, depression rates are up, anxiety rates are up. You want to be there for your kid in every possible way, but at the same time, just doing the basic act of like, we're at the dinner table, we have 10 minutes together. What you doing? And being open instead of peppering with questions like, oh, hey, you had a play date the other day. How was that? Did you have fun? These big, open-ended things that just get kids talking, that gives you a lot more information than they might even realize. It's much better than being like, what did you see on your phone today? And it can be tempting to go straight for the jugular, but what you want is to give them a chance to feel like they can talk to you. And that, I think, is one of the biggest protective factors that parents can offer. That said, if you notice these signs in your kid, do not wait. These things are serious. And when a kid is depressed or anxious, there is help. So reach out, find someone. Don't hesitate to contact the guidance counselor, anybody who you think might be able to give you some good insight. That's an important place to say, let's pause, let's check in.
Now, you have worked at both the Child Mind Institute, and now you're working at understood.org. And you have your own experiences with helping children who learn differently. I know that's such a broad topic, obviously. We're not going to be able to cover all of that. But how can we empower children as parents and caregivers of children who learn differently?
I can speak from personal experience. I have ADHD and dyscalculia, and I had parents who were really supportive at a time when girls didn't have ADHD. They were there, and part of it is making sure that your child has the services they need, making sure that they have access to any kind of thing that the school provides, right? But a bigger thing, and I think this is something that doesn't get talked about, is how little understood learning differences really are. People don't really know. So it's one of the things that I always say to everybody. A child can be smart and have a learning difference. In fact, most of the kids with learning differences are incredibly smart. A child can be incredibly good at math and have a learning difference. They can be the best reader in their class and have a learning difference. Making sure that you're not categorizing things like, well, you can do this, why can't you do this? The thing about learning differences, that part of the definition is a discrepancy between ability and aptitude. So if it seems like your child should be able to do something and they're struggling, that's a place to dive in and say, what's really going on here? Because the first and most important thing you can do to empower kids who learn and think differently is believe that their learning and thinking differences are real and that it's not about just trying harder. Because those words, those kind of very small, simple seeming words, just try harder. Can you just try? Those are some of the most damaging words for a kid who learns and thinks differently. So sticking to, how can we make this better? Instead of, could you just work a little bit harder? Or I knew you could do it. I know you can do it. Come on. Those are the things you want to avoid. Empowering them is about making sure that they have the tools they need to do well with the brain that they have, because there's nothing wrong with that brain. It just doesn't work for the way that things are taught.
Can we expect the school to do their part and their share as well?
I think in an ideal world we could expect that, but in reality, no. This is a place where, like we've talked about, schools are big, services are vast, people have their own things that they come in with. Often schools are under-resourced. You want to make sure that you are really in there advocating for your kid, and I think if you talk to any parent of a child who has learning and thinking difference, they're going to say the same thing, that it was a fight. That said, there are so many places where you can reach out and meet other people who have kids who learn and think differently. You can connect with other parents, and the biggest piece, and this is something that is really important to me and I think gets glossed over, is supporting yourself emotionally and supporting your child emotionally. And that can look like making sure your kid has things where they feel competent outside of school, helping scaffold some of the social stuff that goes along with having a learning and thinking difference. Making sure, and this is advice that my parents got when I was a child, and it changed my life because it was so valuable. I had a teacher in 3rd grade, Dan, at PS3, and he said, she's really smart, she'll be okay, keep her ego intact. So all my life, no matter how difficult things were, I knew my parents loved me and that they wanted me to do well and that they believed I was okay. And giving your child that gift, that can make all the difference because it doesn't always feel that way when you're not at home. So making sure that they know that they're great, that you think that, and I'm not talking about empty praise, I'm talking about that kind of thing where you say like, let's take a break from homework and just take a walk together. Like, what have you been learning? Oh, you like that book? Checking in with them, treating them like a human being and making sure that they know that you believe that they're a good kid. That can make all the difference in the world.
Now, we are running out of time, but I have such an expert in front of me that I'm just going to take advantage quickly. I'm sorry. So if you have a child who you suspect is having learning difficulties, what is the earliest age at which you would have a child be tested?
Most people, it depends on the learning and thinking difference.
Okay.
Most people will say it's around 3rd grade for ADHD. That said, you can get them tested earlier. It really depends on what the difference is. So dyslexia can show up even earlier than that, right at the, when kids are having trouble rhyming sounds, for example. There's a lot of different signs. the thing I would say, just as a blanket thing, is if you have concerns, don't keep them to yourself.
Okay.
It's always fine to check in with a psychologist. You can look to see if there's somebody who takes your your insurance. That's something you can always do. Anytime you have the chance to just give yourself a little bit more information, just give yourself a boost, check in with somebody who is a professional. That's always a good idea. Because the worst thing they can say is, oh, it's developmental, don't worry about it, they'll grow out of it. And the best thing that they can say is, I spotted that. I'm so glad you came to me. Let's talk. I know we can help this kid.
We only have a little over a minute. I have two more quick things I want to get in there. Encouraging optimism. You've given some ideas already that were wonderful in believing in your child. How do we encourage optimism?
Help your kid enjoy things. Make sure that they have outlets for the things that they like and that they have something coming up that they're excited about. Talk about the good stuff. If a day was bad, well, was lunch good? There's always a chance to kind of bring some sunshine into the moment. That said, don't just encourage optimism for the sake of doing it. You might want to just be like, just feel better, I know you're struggling. That won't work. The real thing that you can do is say, well, it sounded like today really sucked. But we do have chocolate ice cream for dessert.
That's nice. All right, last point. Should kids take a mental health day? When and why? That's my last question.
Last question.
Because I've seen that written about, and I need the day off.
I will say the experts that I've talked to, and my personal opinion is yes, sometimes there are conditions. The ability, if you think of mental health as important as physical health, they have the same level of value for a child's well-being. You are going to say, like, you would never send your child to school if they were so sick they could barely get out of bed. Right? If a kid needs a break, that's something that is important for them. They might just need a day to recharge and figure out what they want to do. Kids take time to think things through. Mental health day is often a good idea. That said, it's good to have criteria so the kid isn't just like, I need a mental health day all days. You want to say, maybe it's once a semester, maybe it's once a month, depending on what a child's individual needs are. Scaffolding the fact that they have a chance to take a break can often make difficult things less taxing. Like, they've been studying like crazy for a test for 2 weeks. Maybe after that test happens, they're allowed to take a day off and just recharge.
So they wouldn't have to fake a stomach ache. You have been so helpful, and we're completely out of time. There's so much information here today. I'm sure that our viewers have found this so helpful. Ray Jacobson, thank you so much for joining us, and I hope we can call on you again.
I would love it.
Because your breadth of knowledge is terrific, and I think it will be very valuable for us. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
You're very welcome. That's it for this edition of EdCast. Stay with us for another season of important conversations about topics in education that matter to you. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.
We'd like to hear from you. Please send your thoughts and comments to cunyedcast@gmail.com.